Alright, we're going to start this with going over the program that I call loop test 1, which simply has a string. It finds the length of the string, and then it uses a for loop to count how many of the letter E's there are in the string. We're then going to move on and do the more complicated one that we worked on in class. Alright, so we have a string, and we will use the length method for strings, or declared and initialized, a variable len for the length. I'm going to have another int variable called count and initialize it to 0, and I will increment each time I find a letter E. The basic format for a for loop is that you say for and then some variable. It needs to be an integer variable or an int variable, and I usually declare the int variable first as int I equals 0. Then how far do you want to go? Well, I can't go to length, because remember that length is going to count the number of characters, but I go by position number from 0. So I'm going to do this from I less than length, and then I plus plus. This says increment by 1. Then we're going to use one of the string and character methods we talked about. We're going to define a character, or a char C, and we're going to say that it is in the ith position in the string S. So we're looking at the character at position I in string S. And then we're going to say if that character is an E, so we have to use the equal, and if it is, then we'll come in and increment count. Otherwise, we'll just drop through and do this over and over and over again. And then finally, we're going to print out how many E's there are in that. So if I compile this and run it, it tells us we have 4. So there's 1, 2, 3, and sure enough there are 4 E's. So this is a simple version of a for loop, and we count starting at 0, so H is at position 0, and we will ask, is that an E? Is that an E? And so forth, and go all the way through. So that's hopefully a fairly straightforward example. In lab this week, way up at the top, alright, what we're going to do is we're going to have a file reader that will read in the contents of a file, and it will be a text file. It doesn't matter, it could be anything. And then we're going to, in a couple of different ways, parse that file. Well, in order to use the file reader class, I need to import Java IO being input output, and we do .star, so we just take it all. So we've saved this as FileReader Demo 1A, and we have declared a file reader. So this is a class. We're going to give it the file reader a name FR. It will be a new file reader, and it takes an argument of a string, and the name of the file we're reading in goes in the string. We're then going to have a buffer reader, BR, is a new buffer reader for the file we've just read in, and the buffer reader will buffer the data as it comes in. We're going to define a string S that we'll use in a moment. We're going to initialize a count to 0, and then we're going to have another string, str, and I'll explain where those are being used. All right, we're now going to use a while loop. And so the condition is, while as this reads in, and we're going to say that the string is going to be the buffer reader read line. It's going to get a line from the file, read it into S, and as long as S is not null, in other words, as long as there was a line to read in, we'll keep doing this. And each time I do, I'm going to pass along and concatenate the new string into str. But I'm also going to add in a new line. And I'm doing that because my text file, paul.txt, is the first, I think it's 4 or 5 lines of the poem on the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. So the string str is to accumulate all of the lines, and S is going to be the individual lines. So I've concatenated or put all those together, and once I've got it all read in, I want to close the file reader. If you don't close the file reader, the program will object. And then, as usual, I'm going to find the length of that string. str is all of the lines of the poem together. And I've got these lines that I've taken out that are the number of characters, and then printing it all out. And then this was just to get me a space. So if I take these, if I put these effectively back in and compile and run, and I put this back up, this was the initial. There are 170 characters, and here is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so there are the first 5 lines of that poem, and that's what was in the text file. All right, at this point, we really don't need the, whoops, wrong place for that. Actually, we will leave in the print so we can look at some items as we go along. All right, again, we're going to use a for loop. And we're going to, again, this time we're going to find the number of spaces. So let's take that out so we print it out. So in this case, what we're doing is saying the character, as opposed to being a letter like E, it's simply a space. So this counts the number of spaces. This is just a different way to do that. So again, if I save everything and run it, it says that I've got 29 spaces. I think I've got more of that going on than I need. Yeah, there we go. So the number of spaces is good. The number of spaces, so there are 29 spaces if we wanted to count them. So again, you've got the for loop for a counter I starting at 0 to less than the length of the entire file. I'm going to increment by 1. I'm going to get a character in the ith position. So this will go from 0 up to, but not including the total length. And then I'm going to say if C == space, add, if not, just keep going and then print that out.